Um, Welcome in, everyone. We're taking a deep dive today into a highly provocative, honestly incredibly dense piece of source material.
Yeah, dense is definitely the right word for it.
Right. Specifically, we're examining Chapter 4, which is titled The Walls of the Garage. And let's unpack this right away, because the author starts with a core dilemma that has almost certainly crossed your mind at some point, especially if you follow global economic trends.
It's the big question, really.
Exactly. So the setup is this. The author argues that our current economic system, what the text continually refers to as the engine.
Right, the engine.
The engine is mathematically guaranteed to concentrate wealth into fewer and fewer hands, deplete planetary resources, and eventually just collapse under its own weight. And the logical question that follows that is, if this engine is on a mathematically guaranteed path to destruction, why don't we just vote to turn it off?
Right.
I mean, you live in a democracy, right? You elect representatives. Why hasn't any modern government simply stepped in and restructured how money and capital operate?
It is a massive structural question, and the author's answer is deeply uncomfortable. But before we dive into the actual mechanics of that answer, I think it's vital to establish our mission for this deep dive today.
Yeah, definitely. Ground rules.
Right, because the source text we're analyzing, it makes some very heavy, politically charged critiques of modern capitalism.
Oh, absolutely.
Critiques of legal frameworks, democratic institutions. And our goal here today isn't to take a side.
No, not at all.
We aren't here to endorse these views or present them as, absolute unquestionable truth. Instead, our mission is to objectively unpack the architecture of the author's argument. We just want to understand how they answer that central question of why the system seems immune to democratic intervention.
That is the perfect framing. We are just here to explore the construction of these ideas. And the author uses a very vivid central metaphor to explain why we can't just flip the off switch. The garage, yes. The thesis is essentially this. The people who built the engine also built the building it sits inside, and they deliberately locked the doors from the inside.
Right.
So we're going to spend our time today looking at exactly how those doors are locked, not with physical padlocks, obviously, but through legal, political, and financial mechanisms.
Yeah, it's a structural lockdown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the first layer of this architecture is something everyone listening interacts with literally constantly, which is the modern corporation.
Yeah, and the text actually refers to the corporation as the most powerful legal invention in modern history, which is a huge claim.
It is a huge claim.
But when you look at it under the law, a corporation is actually treated as a person.
Right. Corporate personhood.
Exactly. It holds legal personhood, it can own property, it can enter into contracts, it can sue people, it can be sued in court. But, and this is where the author points out a massive discrepancy, while it holds the rights of a person, it lacks all the biological and moral vulnerabilities of a human being.
Right. You can't put a corporation in jail.
You can't physically imprison it, and it possesses no literal conscience. And the text relies heavily here on the work of legal scholar Joel Lacan to explore the implications of this.
Byam's work is fascinating here.
It really is. Because Byam's analysis points out a crucial legal reality. A corporation is legally required to prioritize one thing above absolutely everything else.
And that's profit.
Profit for its shareholders, exactly.
And Byam's framing is so interesting because we usually treat corporate greed as, I don't know, a moral failing of the CEO or a corrupt board of directors. But the text is arguing it's actually an architectural feature of the law.
It's a mandate.
It is a legal mandate. But wait, let me play devil's advocate for just a second here.
Sure.
Isn't that profit motive exactly what drives innovation? I mean, without that relentless push for shareholder returns, wouldn't the engine just stall out entirely?
Well, that is the traditional defense. And to be fair, the text acknowledges that corporations do drive immense innovation. But the author's critique, channeled through Lacan, is about what happens when profit isn't just a goal, but the exclusive legal mandate.
The only thing that matters.
Right, because think about it. If a CEO decides to spend, say, millions of dollars to aggressively reduce a factory's carbon emissions, simply because it's the moral thing to do.
Just to be a good neighbor.
Exactly. The shareholders can technically sue that CEO for breaching their fiduciary duty.
Wow.
The corporation is structurally forbidden from being purely altruistic. And Lacan takes this to a very clinical conclusion. He suggests that if an actual human being behaved the way a corporation is legally mandated to behave,
Like relentlessly pursuing self-interest.
relentlessly,
Yeah.
externalizing all costs onto others, feeling zero remorse for any collateral damage, A psychiatrist would literally diagnose that person as a psychopath.
The text literally labels the corporation a legally constructed psychopath,
Yes.
which is such a striking phrase. And it uses that mechanism as the primary vehicle driving the engine. And I think it's really crucial to note here, for you listening, the text isn't saying that people working inside these buildings are bad people.
Right. It's not about evil individuals.
No. It's arguing that the legal structure they operate within demands psychopathic behavior. So, for instance, a corporation might calculate that paying a massive environmental fine every single year is mathematically cheaper than upgrading their waste disposal systems.
It's just a math problem to them.
Exactly. A human might feel guilt about poisoning a river, right? But the legally constructed psychopath simply sees a favorable line item on a spreadsheet.
And that structural distinction is really the bedrock of the author's argument. But if the corporation is the vehicle driving the engine, the text suggests we have to look deeper at the road it actually drives on.
Right.
And that brings us to the second mechanism locking the garage doors, which is the law itself.
Okay, so if the corporation is just a vehicle, how does the text define the infrastructure?
So to explain this, the author introduces the research of legal scholar Katharina Pistor. And she has spent years basically mapping out how wealth is actually created and protected.
Right.
And her central argument is that capital is not a natural economic force. It's not like gravity. Capital is, in her words, legally coded.
Legally coded.
Yes. The law is not some neutral referee just calling balls and strikes on a level playing field. Through the really intricate weaving of contract law, property law, corporate law, ordinary assets are granted special, almost magical attributes.
Like what kind of attributes?
Pistor specifically highlights priority, durability, and universality. These legal codes literally transform a regular asset into a wealth-extracting machine.
Okay, for anyone listening who works in software or tech, think about it like this. The law is the operating system.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It's the OS of inequality. You're taking a standard piece of hardware, say just a piece of land or a written promise, and you're installing a custom OS that grants it super user privileges.
That is an excellent analogy. Yeah, let's look at durability, for example. If you or I make a handshake agreement, it generally dies when we do.
Right.
But if an asset is properly legally coded into, say, a trust or a corporate shell, it achieves durability. It can outlive its human creators. It just keeps accumulating and compounding wealth across generations, and it's completely shielded from the taxes and liabilities that would easily dismantle ordinary human wealth.
Right. Ordinary people get taxed. Trusts just keep growing.
Exactly. And Pistor's research shows that this operating system ensures that certain claims, usually the claims of the wealthiest creditors, they always get priority when things go bankrupt. And the law provides the code that enforces these hierarchies universally across the globe.
Which naturally creates a massive conceptual friction point. Because if this operating system is so heavily skewed, who actually has the keyboard?
Right.
Who gets to write the code?
And the text answers that by pointing directly to the money. The author introduces economist Michael Hudson here in his analysis of what he calls the FIRE sector, F-I-R-E.
Okay, break that down for us.
It stands for finance, insurance, and real estate.
The fire sector. So we're talking about Wall Street, we're talking about massive insurance conglomerates, global real estate holding companies.
Exactly.
But how does the text argue they actually write the code? I mean, they aren't staging military overthrows to dictate policy.
No, they don't need to use violence or overt force. According to the text, the fire sector captures government by making itself absolutely indispensable to the political process.
Indispensable how?
They fund the political campaigns. Yeah. They draft the actual language of the international trade treaties that sovereign nations end up signing. And they heavily staff the regulatory agencies that are supposedly meant to oversee them.
The classic revolving door.
Precisely.
A top executive from a massive financial institution steps down, takes a job heading the exact government agency that regulates that institution.
Shapes the policy for a few years.
Right. Shapes the policy, and then leaves to take an even higher paying job back in the private sector. The text points out how completely normalized this has become. We don't even bat an eye at it anymore.
It is entirely routine. And the text pairs this regulatory capture with the work of another economist, Brett Christophers, who documents a fundamental mutation in how the modern economy actually functions.
A mutation.
Yeah. Christophers argues that we've moved away from an economy that produces actual value, like manufacturing physical goods or providing tangible services.
The stuff we usually think of as the economy.
Right. And we've transitioned almost entirely into an economy based on extracting rent.
Okay, so Christopher's is pointing out that we've moved from a factory-building economy to a toll booth economy.
A toll booth economy, yes.
It's all about who owns the asset and who can charge rent for access to it.
Precisely. And in this economic context, rent extraction doesn't just mean your monthly apartment payment to your landlord. It means leveraging an asset to siphon off wealth without producing anything new. The text highlights land, debt, and intellectual property as the primary vehicles for this.
Let's use intellectual property as an example to really unpack this for the listener.
Okay, great. Imagine a life-saving drug whose foundational research was heavily funded by public taxpayer money through university grants.
Happens all the time.
All the time. Then a pharmaceutical corporation buys the patent being the legally coded asset, and then they hike the price by 5,000%.
Just astronomical numbers.
Right. And they didn't invent the drug. They aren't improving the drug. They're simply using the legal operating system to place a toll booth between a dying patient and the medicine. That is pure rent extraction.
And the fire sector specializes in acquiring and defending those toll booths. So for keeping track of the locked doors of this garage...
You've got a few now.
Yeah, we have legally mandated psychopathic corporations running on an operating system designed to prioritize and protect capital, which is actively written and maintained by a fire sector that specializes in extracting wealth from the rest of the society.
That's the architecture.
Which brings up a glaring question. If the fire sector is actively capturing regulatory bodies and setting up toll booths literally everywhere, why aren't voters rioting in the streets? How does this happen in broad daylight in supposedly democratic countries?
That is the exact question the author anticipates, and it introduces one of the most sobering concepts in the entire text. The author relies on political theorist Sheldon Wolin to define this specific arrangement of power.
Wolin calls it inverted totalitarianism.
Inverted totalitarianism, yes.
It's a dense, very academic phrase,
Yeah.
but the way the text unpacks it is honestly chilling. How does Wolin contrast this with the regimes we normally associate with the word totalitarian?
Well, Wolin draws a really sharp line between this modern system and 20th century classical totalitarianism. If you look at fascist or Stalinist regimes, classical totalitarianism was loud. It was hyper-visible.
Lots of spectacle.
Yes. It relied on mass mobilization, military parades, mandatory uniforms, charismatic dictators, and the overt, terrifying use of secret police to instill fear. It constantly disrupted daily life.
You couldn't ignore it.
You couldn't. But inverted totalitarianism, Wolin argues, is the exact opposite. It is quiet.
Quiet.
It is driven by faceless corporations and technocrats rather than charismatic demagogues. And most importantly, it doesn't need to use physical violence to maintain control because it maintains the perfect illusion of democracy.
I want you to think about your own life as you listen to this. You still go to the ballot box every few years. Politicians still stand at podiums and debate on television. The courts still hear cases. The entire facade of democratic participation is completely intact.
Totally intact.
You are totally free to log onto social media right now and argue passionately with strangers about any cultural issue you want.
And this is the absolute crux of Wolin's theory. The actual levers of power that control the engine are entirely insulated from your democratic reach.
They're behind the locked doors.
Exactly. The intricacies of corporate law, the drafting of international trade agreements, the monetary policy set by central banks, the legal coding of capital, those are off limits. They are handled behind closed doors by the fire sector and their lobbyists.
So it's basically a distraction.
Wolin argues that the genius of inverted totalitarianism is that it actually encourages the population to be fiercely divided over cultural and social issues. It creates the feeling of a vibrant political discourse, while the economic operating system remains completely untouched and unquestioned.
You are absolutely free to argue about everything except what actually runs the engine.
Exactly.
And that explains the profound political fatigue so many people feel. That sense that no matter which party takes power, the fundamental economic trajectory, the concentration of wealth, the extraction of rent, none of it ever actually changes.
It just keeps humming along.
But what happens if a genuine reformer slips through? Say someone gets elected on a wildly popular platform of actually rewriting the OS. They want to break up the monopolies, ban the revolving door, fundamentally change how the central bank operates. Does the text believe the system just lets them legislate?
It does not. And this is where the author introduces the final, deepest layer of the locked garage. They bring in the work of researcher Peter Dale Scott, who coined the concept of deep politics.
Okay, I know the moment the phrase deep politics or deep state comes up, it immediately sounds like we are entering into tinfoil hat territory.
Right, it triggers all sorts of alarm.
It evokes Hollywood thrillers,
Yeah.
shadowy cabals smoking cigars in a poorly lit basement, plotting world domination. But the text treats this concept with very rigorous academic framing.
It does, and it's very careful to clarify that this is not a Hollywood conspiracy. Conspiracies require incredible coordination and secrecy among a few individuals. Deep politics is about structural alignment.
Structural alignment.
Scott defines it as a permanent infrastructure of unaccountable power. It's the dense, complex network of relationships between intelligence agencies, massive financial institutions, established political power, and sometimes even organized crime.
Wow.
And this network operates constantly beneath the surface of official, public-facing governance.
But how does it actually activate? I mean, if it's not a secret meeting of supervillains calling the shots, how does this permanent infrastructure stop a genuine democratic reformer?
It acts much like an immune system for the engine.
An immune system.
Most of the time, the engine hums along, and the deep political network doesn't really need to intervene in daily governance. But when the engine faces a legitimate existential threat, like a reformer attempting to audit a central bank or nationalize a highly profitable resource or fundamentally redistribute property rights, the immune response activates. And it activates through completely legal institutional channels.
So we're talking about market reactions and institutional pressure, not necessarily assassins in the night.
Exactly. A reformer proposes structural change, and suddenly, the bond markets revolt, threatening to crash the national currency. Credit rating agencies threaten to downgrade the sovereign debt, which would instantly make borrowing cripplingly expensive for the government.
Squeezing them financially.
Yes. Intelligence agencies might suddenly leak damaging, out-of-context information to corporate-owned media, which then relentlessly frames the reformer as a dangerous, radical, threatening national stability. Major corporate donors simultaneously pull funding from the reformer's political party, causing their own allies to turn against them in the name of pragmatism.
So it just creates sudden legislative gridlock.
Right. It's a systemic immune response. It's death by 1,000 institutional cuts.
And according to the author, this is why every serious attempt at fundamentally altering the monetary system or the legal coding of capital in modern history has been neutralized. It is not because the reformers lacked popular support or had inherently flawed ideas. It is simply because the people who control the fuel for the engine also own the building, hold the keys, and have a permanent infrastructure in place to ensure those doors stay locked.
They are absolutely not going to hand over the keys voluntarily.
It is a profoundly sobering conclusion to the chapter. It really ties the entire architectural metaphor together perfectly. We cannot simply vote or legislate our way out of the engine's path because the legal structures, the mandated corporate psychopathy, the captured regulatory agencies, the illusion of inverted totalitarianism, and the immune response of deep politics all interlock.
They reinforce each other.
They work in concert to ensure the core operating system cannot be altered by popular will.
Okay, let's take a breath and look at what this all means. The author has built a meticulous case that we are operating within an economic engine mathematically destined for collapse, driven by corporate entities legally required to ignore the damage they cause. This engine runs on a legal code written by a financial sector dedicated to rent extraction, shielded by a political system that offers the illusion of democracy while actively suppressing any real structural change through an institutional immune system.
It is a heavy, heavy thesis.
It is, and it deliberately leaves the reader standing at the edge of a massive conceptual cliffhanger. The author ends this chapter by posing the question that sets up the rest of the book.
Which is?
If the doors are truly locked from the inside, and we are trapped in this garage with an engine that is systematically destroying its own environment, how do billions of people keep waking up every single morning and willingly feeding it?
Wow.
Why do we continue to go to work, pay our taxes, and participate in a system the author claims is mathematically doomed?
That is the ultimate teaser. It immediately makes you want to flip to chapter 5 to see how the author explains our psychological compliance.
It is highly effective structural writing. But before we wrap up our analysis today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds on the architecture we just explored, but perhaps offers a different angle of approach.
I'm always here for the perspective shift. What are you thinking?
We just spent this entire deep dive analyzing how the walls of the garage are built entirely out of legal code, contracts, property rights, corporate charters. It is an operating system written by a select centralized few. But what happens when everyday citizens recognize that the law is just code and they decide to start writing their own?
Like utilizing open source principles for legal and economic frameworks.
Precisely. If the current system relies on centralized, legally coded monopolies enforcing rent extraction, could the solution exist entirely outside of that locked garage? Think about the underlying philosophy of decentralized technologies.
Like blockchain or distributed ledgers.
Or the rise of platform cooperatives and open source legal trusts. What if, instead of expending all our democratic energy trying to unlock the heavily guarded doors of the old system, people quietly use new technologies to build a brand new, transparent garage right next door?
A completely parallel system.
One where the code isn't written by the fire sector, but is open source, verifiable, and governed by the community. It raises a fascinating evolutionary question. Could the old, locked garage eventually be rendered completely obsolete simply because the population decided to migrate their value and park it somewhere else?
Building a new garage with open source code next door? That is a radically empowering thought to counter the sheer weight of inverted totalitarianism. It completely shifts the paradigm from how do we defeat the locked doors to how do we build a better building. That is a brilliant concept to chew on.
I think it leaves us on a really generative note.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Unpacking these dense structural arguments and challenging our baseline assumptions is what makes this so rewarding, and we couldn't do it without your curiosity driving the conversation. Keep asking those big structural questions, keep examining the code running in the background of your life, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.